One of the key breakthroughs in HTML5 is the ability to store data on the local machine. Data storage, as this is known, is a balance between having all of your information assembled on the server and taking advantage of the client for client-side processing. HTML5 data storage is an extension of the already existing cookie mechanism. And in fact, HTML5 draws a distinction between two very different, although closely related, types of storage. One is session storage that lasts as long as the page or tab is open. The other is local storage that is persisted on the hard drive indefinitely. These two types share methods and properties, but they are distinguished distinctly by how long the data is stored. In either case, both types are origin dependent, which means the data retrieved must be from the same source, the same server, as you are obtaining the page. Let's start by looking at session storage. Session storage, as noted, is tied to a single window or tab. The data, as with local storage, is stored as items, where an item is a key value pair. The two most important methods are setItem, which takes a key and a value, and getItem, which takes a key. Let's look at this in code. To see session state at work, we're going to create a form that will gather a key and value pair and allow us to retrieve the value by the key. We're going to take that in some detail, as it's a great review of the HTML5 we've seen so far. We begin in the body of our HTML by creating a section and setting its ID, in this case, to form section. Within that section, we'll create our form. Within the form, we're going to create a label for the key and an input type for that key. And then we'll create a label for the value, and we'll make the value input a text area. Finally, we need two buttons, one for saving and the other for retrieving. That completes our input form and our form section. Let's create a second section for displaying the retrieved data. And in there, for now, we'll initialize that with just the words no data. Before we go on to writing the script, we need a little bit of CSS to make this layout work. So let's turn to the CSS file. And the first thing we need is some layout for the data form itself. So that will float to the left. We'll set its padding and its border. We also need to set for the data area. We're going to add a div into the data with the retrieved information from the session state. And finally, in the key area, we want to set the width of the text. That's our simple CSS for this application. And we can run this in Opera to take a look at what our page looks like. And we see we have an area to enter the key, an area to enter the value, which is a text area and is therefore expandable, our save and retrieve buttons, and then our box where we will display the data when we retrieve it. The key work, of course, is going to be done in the JavaScript. In the initiate function, we're going to set up the event handlers for the save and retrieve button by adding event listeners. The first thing we have to do, of course, is get the buttons, which we do with getElementById. And then we're going to add 2 event listeners. With that in place, we can implement the event listeners. The first event listener is save item. Save item wants to obtain what's in the key and what's in the value. To get the key, we're going to say document getElementById, pass in the ID of the element, and get its value. And we'll do the same thing for the value. And we need to get its actual value. To save it in session storage, all we have to do is to offset into that dictionary using the key as the index into the dictionary and setting at that location the value that we retrieve. The event handler for retrieving, for the retrieve button, will go ahead and get the data area. We also need to get the key to know what data to retrieve. We obtain the data this time not from the data box, but rather by going to session storage and indexing in using the key. We'll take the value that we retrieve there and we'll display it in the data area by setting the inner HTML. That's all of our logic. Let's return to our browser, update the browser, and enter our first key, which we can call test1, and our first value, which we'll call value1, and click save. We can then enter test2 and enter value2 to go with it and press save. Let's add one more. Test3, value3, save. If we now go back and set the key to test2 and hit retrieve, it does in fact retrieve the associated value with test2. If we change that to test3 and press retrieve, we get the value for test3. So you can see that working with session storage is very straightforward. To save, you simply pass the key as the index into session storage and assign to that the value. And to retrieve, you pass the key to session storage and assign what you get back to a variable. There are a few other methods that are also very useful when working with session storage. The first of these is length, which tells you how many items there are in session storage altogether. There is a key collection, and you can index into the key collection to find a particular value. You can also call remove item passing in a key, and that will delete that single item. If you wish to delete all the items in session storage, then you will use clear. Let's return to our previous example and add 2 new buttons to our form. The first button will be labeled delete and will be used to delete a single object from the session storage. The second button will be called review and will be used to look at all of the items that are currently in session storage. To implement this, we turn to script.js. The first step in script.js is to retrieve the buttons using getElementById as we did for the previous buttons. The second step is to add event listeners for our new buttons. So we need an event listener for delete button and one for review button. We'll call the event listener for delete button delete item, and we'll call the event listener for the review button review all. Let's start with delete item. We'll create a new function called delete item, and the very first thing we want to do is confirm with the user that they do in fact want to delete this item. And so we use the confirm dialog. If the user says yes, they do want to delete this item, then we need to retrieve the key for the item they want to delete and get the value of that key. We can then call session storage and call the method remove item, passing in that key. Let's update the UI to indicate that, in fact, the removal was successful. That's all there is to deleting the item. Let's turn to review all, which is our method for examining all of the items that are currently in session storage. Here, we will use the session storage length for creating our for loop. That will allow us to iterate through every key in session storage one by one. And so we will assign a variable to whatever is at the index. We can then retrieve the value at that key, and we can display that in our data section. Notice that we use plus equal to build up the inner HTML. And we use a line break so that each key and value set is on its own line. Let's save all of that. Open Opera and update. We'll put in our key of test1 and a value of 1, a key of test2 and a value of 2, a key of test3 and a value of 3, and then we will review all of that data. We'll then go to test 2, retrieve that data, click delete, confirm that we do in fact want to delete that data, and then review, and we see we have 1 and 3 and 2 has been deleted.